After entering a monster-filled palace unknowingly, the monster transformed her brother into someone else, and her body became his. Here, when Ray went to him with food, Cloden came out to her with his hands injured and refused to let her enter. And here, Ray said to her, "Why are you shouting? You're hurt, Cloden. Are you hiding something?" And Cloden was tense. "What?" And suddenly, Ray dropped the plate of food from her hands. Then in shock, she started crying and saying to herself, "What did I just do?" And here Cloden looked at the broken plate and said to himself, "It's dangerous." Then he said to Ray, "It's okay, Ray. I'm sorry." And Ray screamed in a breakdown and said to him, "I didn't mean to be a burden on you. I didn't mean to bother you." And she was about to leave, but Cloden said to her, "Wait, Ray. I must be busy. I'm sorry." But Cloden shouted. On her, Ray said, "And you should go back to what you were doing. I'll leave then." But Cloden grabbed her arm and said, "Ray!" Then he shouted in her face, "I didn't say you're annoying. Don't repeat that again." And Ray, tense, said, "Okay, I'll leave. You should get back to work." And here Cloden looked at her angrily and then said to her, "Are you running away from me?" And Ray, surprised, said, "Run away? I'll ask the housekeepers to sweep up the broken glass." But Cloden grabbed her tightly and said, "Ray, I don't care if you raise your voice at me or even get mad at me, but when you try to walk away from me, it drives me crazy. My head hurts like it's going to explode." And Ray looked at him in shock and said, "I just didn't want to bother you because you seemed busy." And Cloden replied, "I'm the one who made you feel that way, so why are you apologizing then?" Then he sighed and said to her, "I'm known for my temper, especially when I'm working." Cloden whispered to himself, "That's why no one comes near me when I'm working." Then he said to her in a loud voice, "You know I'm a good-for-nothing jerk, right? You pity me, don't you?" Ray was shocked and said, "What? Don't say that. You can be the sweetest person on earth. Not only that, but you always encourage me to do my best. You have no idea how much that helps me." And Cloden looked at her and said, "Okay, then because I like you." And here Ray asked him, "So does that mean your liking for me is likely to diminish?" Cloden replied, "What do you have to worry about me falling deeper in love with you?" Then he pulled her closer to him and said, "You can't even get out of bed yet." And Ray said, "Really? You'll never change, will you?" And Cloden, tense, said, "Ray, you're acting a bit strange today." And Ray couldn't respond, then said to him, "I'm sorry. Are you okay?" And Cloden looks at his injury and Ray says, "That hurts." Cloden replies, "It hurts because I touched it." Then Cloden approaches her and says, "I want you to treat my wound." Ray treats his wound and Cloden looks at her and says, "You're beautiful today." Ray is stunned and turns to look away. Cloden asks, "Did you dress up just for me?" Then he takes her hair in his hands and looks at it, saying, "Ray, just as you want to be beautiful in front of me." Then he smells her hair and says, "There's a side of me I don't want to show you." Ray turns to him suddenly and says, "But I'm still disappointed and I want to be by your side, Cloden, no matter what state you're in." Then Ray looks down and says, "I'm afraid you'll change, Cloden. What if you end up not liking me anymore?" Cloden laughs suddenly and Ray looks at him in astonishment. Cloden takes her hand and whispers, "You think I won't like you anymore? How could you even think such nonsense? That will never happen." Then Cloden looks into her eyes and says, "I'm the one who should ask you not to change." Ray remembers her childhood, which started with attention, and then that attention diminished from her parents' side. She says, "But, Cloden, every other person in my life has changed." Cloden is stunned as Ray leans on his shoulder and says, "My love was always one-sided, and I thought it would be that way for the rest of my life. But you reciprocated my feelings for the first time." And when he finished, he looked at her in astonishment. Ray continued, and she said, "This has never happened before." Ray's hand is shaking, and she says, "Then why should I change?" And when she said to him, "I love you, Cloden, so don't ever change." Cloden looked at her and felt the curse that had become her possession. Then he hugged her in relief, saying to himself, "A curse I never want to be free from." And the scene changes to the castle garden, where Ray is looking at the flowers in amazement and says, "These blue flowers are especially big. Will they get bigger? Where's the gardener? He was always here in the afternoon." And when she found him, she went to him and said happily, "Excuse me, sir, I would like to ask you a favor." And when he said, "The blue roses, oh my," Ray looked at him in astonishment, because it turned out to be her brother who had changed his appearance into someone else and was given the name John. And he said to her, "Don't you agree, Miss Lisbon?" And Ray whispered to herself, "I thought he was the gardener. He calls me by my last name, but everyone calls me Lady Ray." Then she said to him, "Hello, John." But John pursed his lips in anger and said, "Humans," and gripped a rose in his hands, saying, "Ordinary humans cannot create something like this." Ray was shocked by his reaction and said to him, "What are you doing? Haze?" Because blue roses don't exist in reality, and maybe a monster could create something like this. Suddenly, the gardener appeared and hit Hayes on the head with his shoe. Ray looked at him in shock, and suddenly the gardener attacked Hayes again. Ray said, "Mr. Gardener?" The gardener looked at her in shock and said to himself, "Did she find out?" And he remembered Hayes's words to her, "Ordinary humans cannot create something like this because blue roses don't exist in reality, and maybe a monster could create something like this." And he said to himself, "I or we are already monsters, and these blue roses are fake too." And Ray was shocked, so he looked at her and said, "No, it's real." Hayes laughed and said, "Oh, you fool! You think I don't know what kind of tricks you're playing." When Hayes said, "You won't fool anyone," the gardener hit him. And now the scene changes to the servant who looked at his watch and said to Cloden, who was making a key with his magic, "Sir, it's time for your medicine." "For why?" And Cloden replied, "I'm sick of everything. The side effects of the curse, my lord, grow stronger when the moon is full." And the servant said to himself nervously, "But it's too early. It's not even a full moon yet. Maybe it's because he used a lot of magic. But I'm glad we have the medicine to calm his anger. Maybe he made this medicine because of Lady Ray. If she hadn't been here, blood would have already been spilled in this castle. I hope it stays that way." And Mr. Cloden threw the key to the servant and said, "Philip, take it." The servant looked at him, and Cloden put his hand on his head and said, "Keep it in a safe place. If you close the door with this key, you can get out from the inside, but no one will be able to enter the room from the outside, and this will keep Ray safe. Remember, when I give you the signal, close the door." And suddenly there was a knock on his door. Cloden said, "Enter." And the maid, Mary, entered and said, "Sir, I think you should see this. Lady Ray." After she told him, Cloden became angry and broke his medicine glass. He went to Ray, who looked at him in shock and said, "Cloden." He approached her angrily and grabbed her, saying, "Ray, did you get into a fight?" The gardener replied, "No, sir. Jack stopped them before things got worse." Cloden, still angry, said to Ray, "Why were you with those scumbags?" Ray said, "Huh? I thought I might be able to help, so I went out." And when Cloden got even angrier and said, "What?" Ray smiled nervously, and she said, "I mean, it would be nice to help with something around the castle. Everyone is always busy." But Cloden gripped her hands tightly and said, "There's no need for that. I never want you to touch the dirt. And if you ever do, I'll cut off their wrists." Ray was shocked by his reaction and said, "What?" And Cloden said, "The same goes for everything else. There's no need to do anything. I told you I want to give you the best of everything." And Ray said nervously, "You treat me like a princess. You say I can be as lazy as I want, and do whatever I want? Cloden smiled and said to her, Yes, I love to hear that. But Ray looked at him nervously and said to herself, But what if he doesn't love me anymore? Then she remembered his words when he said to her, Do you think I won't love you anymore? How can you think such nonsense? And she said to herself, Cloden promised me he would never change. But I don't know where I stand. I need some kind of commitment. That way I can stay here even if Cloden's feelings change. Cloden woke her up and said, Ray. And she smiled and said, Okay. I was just outside so I could look at the flowers. I just happened to run into them. At the same time, she said to herself, I don't want to make this situation any worse. Plus, Cloden looks tired. Cloden said, What? You were looking at the flowers without me? Ray said, You were busy, Cloden. I'll be sure to ask next time. Now let's go inside. Cloden looked at the servant and whispered to him, Make sure they get the proper training. Then he left with Ray. On the day of the full moon, the curse grew stronger, and he was unable to control himself and hurt her. When they returned to the castle and Mary went to see her, Ray left in sorrow and told her that she would be in her room. And here Mary said to Cloden, I'll be inside too, my lord. And she went to Ray and said, Lady Ray, I'll help you get dressed. And here, when Ray took off her clothes, Mary was shocked by the injuries on her body. She said to herself, The Lord has gone mad because of the curse. Perhaps it's for the best that he stopped here. Helping her, she thought to herself, At least she's walking on her own 2 feet. Suddenly, Ray said to her, Mary, why am I always the one who has to be kept in the dark? Mary, I'm sorry, she said, shouting at her. Why won't anyone tell me anything? Mary was shocked. What are you? Ray cut her off and yelled at her. You fainted last time because of Cloden, didn't you? At the moment, Mary thought she had discovered their secret. She thought to herself, I knew she would find out someday. Even though she might be inexperienced and naive, she would be a fool not to realize that there is something strange about this castle. Smiling nervously, she said to Lady Ray, all the while thinking to herself, But we can't be the ones to take the blow. Then she said, I'm afraid there's a big misunderstanding. I fainted because of my illness. It has nothing to do with Lord Clouden. Ray shouted at her in anger and said, I thought you were different, Mary, but you also want me to close my eyes and ears even if something strange happens. Do you expect me to laugh it off as if nothing happened? She fell silent for a moment and then said, I'd like to be alone. Please leave. And so she did. And she left. And here she found Clouden facing her, and she said, Lord Clouden. He looked at her, and then she said, I think Lady Ray is upset. What if you tried to calm her down a bit? When Clouden didn't respond, she smiled and said, Lord Clouden, did Lady Ray find out everything? This didn't happen, did it? Everything will be fine. You know how kind and innocent she is. She'll understand as long as you explain everything to her. Clouden, what do you want me to tell her? That I'm an animal going into heat because of a cursed curse? Mary, that's not what I meant. Clouden, and that she should forgive me because I'm a centuries-old monster? Exactly how do you want me to explain? What do you think will give her peace of mind? And he began to torment her as she suffered in pain. And here he said to her, It's better this way. And here she looked at him in surprise. Clouden, it's much better this way. She was shocked when he said to her, Let her go. And here she said to him, What do you mean? I can't understand what you just said. You want her to stay with you, Lord Clouden. And here he smiled and said to her, You have a cunning side, Mary. Well, I'm sure life has gotten easier for you lately. You've been sleeping well. I even heard you humming yesterday, and I think you found life somewhat tolerable after making Ray the docile lamb. All you care about is your own well-being, not Ray's. He then laughed and said to her, It will do her no good to be involved with monsters like us. It's pointless. And here Mary put her face down and thought to herself, I thought this was just a bump in the road. After all, they were madly in love. It was just a silly lover's quarrel, and they were just confused." And here at dinner time, Ray suddenly got up. Mary, "Lady Ray, won't you finish your dinner?" And here Ray said to her, "Mary, I would like to have dinner in my room from tomorrow on. I want to be alone." And here Mary looked at Clouden in shock, but Clouden just kept drinking his wine without paying attention to what Ray was saying. This made Mary feel nervous, and she said to herself, "I've never seen Lady Ray so angry before. I was worried about her intense reaction, but I knew how much they desired each other. And I thought all they needed was a little time. But Lady Ray doesn't even want to be in the same room with Lord Clouden anymore, and Lord Clouden is making no effort to fix this problem." And here she said to the servant, "This can't happen." And the servant, "Are you okay?" And Mary, in shock, said to him, "It seems Lady Ray has made up her mind, hasn't she? She'll suppress her feelings for Lord Clouden. Lord Clouden won't do anything, but when Lady Ray finally leaves him, I'll kill us both." And the servant, "Whoa, Mary, this can't happen. I won't let this happen." And the servant put his hand on his head and said, "Do you have a plan?" And Mary hadn't thought about that and said, "A plan?" Then she said to him, "A plan? Yes. I have to do something about this." And she went to the kitchen. And while she was preparing the soup, she remembered her past before she turned into a monster when Clouden said to her, "So you're the mother of 2 sons?" Mary, "Yes." Clouden, "My beginnings look ugly these days. Send me one of them when they all recover." And here she said, "When my family died from a deadly plague, I came to this castle in a desperate attempt to cling to the last straw, and the mysterious lord of the castle showed me kindness that would save my family. And the medicine he gave me was indeed a miracle, and my son, who couldn't get out of bed no matter how hard I tried, was healed within days, and my heart was full of gratitude to the lord of the castle. But at that moment, I remembered Clouden's words to her. My beginnings look ugly these days. Send me one of them when they all recover." And here she said to herself, "When he grows up." And indeed, her son grew up and got married. And she continues and says, "It's only natural for people to be deceitful, so I broke my promise to the lord of the castle." And here she said to herself, "If he lives in a big castle like this, he should be able to find people to work for him at any time. He was kind enough to give me a cure to save my family, so everything should be fine." But the truth is that she had turned into a monster. And here she said, "I shouldn't have done that. Oh my God, forgive me." And here she went back to Clouden again and started knocking on his door, saying, "Please help me." And when she went in to him, he said to her, "I see you've been cursed. I'm afraid I can't help you. Maybe you should have kept your promise to us." And here she collapsed in tears from the shock of what he said. And from then on, she remained in the castle and never left it. And out of her deep regret, she said, "I would never have taken the medicine if I had known this would happen." And here the servant came to her with the soup, saying, "How long do you plan to stay like this?" And here Mary looked at the food and started talking, saying, "My mental health has improved over time, or maybe I'm just starting to feel numb." And here we return to the present, and she is still talking to herself. I said to myself, I will atone for breaking my promise, and my family will become closer to God because of my sacrifice. Then she poured the drink she had made and went to Lord Clouden with it and knocked on his door, saying, "Lord Clouden, I brought some tea for Lady Ray because she has a cold, but she won't open the door for me." And here she remembered Clouden's words when he said to her, "All you care about is your own well-being, not Ray's. I think you've found life bearable enough after making Ray the docile lamb." And here she smiled and said, "What next? Lord Clouden is the one who gave up on breaking the curse, but Lady Ray was the driving force that changed that, and he expects me to just give it up? It seems like Lady Ray has a high fever and called me cunning. He blurred the lines between good and evil for me long ago. I doubt Lord Clouden will give up on Lady Ray." And here she said to him, "But I think she'll open the door for you." and she left him the drink and went away, saying to herself, Lord Clouden, we are all lonely souls gathered inside this cursed castle. I hope they will reconcile soon. We need Lady Ray in this castle. Then we monsters can finally know what it feels like to be human. And here Clouden went to her with the drink, looked at her, and found her talking because of the fever. She was saying, No, I'm sorry, don't leave me. And she was crying in her sleep, saying his name, Clouden. And here Clouden sat beside her and wiped her tears, saying, Ray. And suddenly Ray woke up, thinking to herself, What is that smell? Did Lady Mary come? And here she found Clouden, and when she called his name, he turned to her and placed his hands on her head, while Ray said to him, Why are you here? And Clouden said, I don't think you have a fever. And he gave her the tea, saying, Drink this. And when she did, she said to herself, It's bitter. He must have thought I was sick. And here she said to him, Clouden, I think my stomach hurts. And Clouden said, Your stomach? Anywhere else? And Ray said, My shoulders and back hurt. My legs hurt too, and my hands. And here Clouden was looking at her in amazement. And Ray, feeling embarrassed, said, And I think my stomach is upset because of... And suddenly Clouden kissed her. And here Ray said to herself, This is the void in my heart that finally feels full. And the first person who saw me for who I really am, I don't care if he's a monster. And here she put him on the bed and held his face, continuing to say to herself, If he's a kind and gentle monster like him. And she looked at him crying and said to herself, I don't mind being eaten. And here he did it with Ray. And suddenly his godfather appeared, smiling and saying, Well, I knew you'd find her. It took you a long time, Clouden. There's nothing I want more right now. You don't regret your decision now, do you? And Clouden, in astonishment, said to himself, Regret. And here he looked at Ray, saying to himself, I could feel it. And I knew that the walls I've built around myself for decades were slowly crumbling. At first, it was just a new game to amuse me. And here he remembered what she told him. You already know this. You already know that I've fallen in love with you. And here he placed his hands on her face, saying, I almost feel bad for imprisoning you. You've become a helpless fool. And here he hugged her. The next morning, Mary brought Ray food, who said to her, Thank you, Lady Mary. I'm sorry I yelled at you yesterday over something trivial like that. I appreciate everything you do for me, Lady Mary. Mary smiled and said, Don't mention it. I was wrong too. And here Ray ate the bread with joy, saying, This is delicious. And suddenly Mary said to her, Were you able to talk to him? Didn't the Lord visit your room last night? There is nothing that cannot be solved by conversation. And here Ray looked at the bread sadly, saying to her, No, I didn't do that. I should talk to him, shouldn't I? And here Mary said to her, Oh, so you haven't had a chance to talk to him yet? And Ray smiled and said to her, Because I'm a coward, Mary. And here Mary said to her, Lady Ray, I can't answer any of the questions you have about this castle. And Ray listened to her as Mary continued and said, Only the Lord knows the answers to those questions. And Ray took a deep breath and said to her, I understand. Afterwards, Ray and Clouden had a falling out, which ended with them sleeping together for a night without speaking a word. In the morning, Ray asked the maid Mary about the secrets of the mansion, but Mary replied that she couldn't answer any questions about the mansion, and that only the master knew the answers to those questions. Ray took a deep breath and said, I understand. The scene then shifts to a rainy day. Ray is lying on the couch, thinking to herself, Clouden is enjoying the rain. She looks out the window and says to herself, The more I try to learn about Clouden and this mansion, the more mysterious everything becomes to me. But now, with him, even the raindrops that fall feel like blessings and unity, and the sun's rays feel like they're burning me. How strange. I never knew that falling in love would be like falling into a deep hole. That's why I never wanted to know what it was like. And now I laugh and cry because of Cloden. I've been tamed indeed. Ray then went to the library and started looking for a book, saying to herself, "Here I am again. Where is Cloden?" She noticed the book she wanted and was about to take it when Cloden suddenly arrived and took it, handing it to her. Ray was stunned. She took the book from him and said, "Cloden, what brings you here?" Ray fell silent and thought to herself, "What do you think of us, Cloden? Am I a nuisance to you? Is there nothing you want to say to me? Am I part of your future, Cloden?" Ray looked at him nervously and said, "The weather is nice today," even though she didn't like the rainy weather. Cloden replied, "But it's not the kind of weather you enjoy." Ray started to cry and said, "Now I love rainy days too." She then asked Cloden, "You weren't by my side when I woke up. Why did you leave without waking me?" She broke down in tears and said, "Is this normal when people break up?" Cloden said to her angrily, "Who says that? Do you want to end our relationship? Then why did you smile and hug me yesterday?" He then bared his chest and said, "I thought I would stop this nonsense because I felt sorry for you, but why do you have to come to me like this every time?" He yelled at her, "Hala, you know that taking something I've given you makes me crazy." Ray approached him and said, "I don't want to stop, Cloden, I love you." Cloden was shocked by her reaction. She continued saying, "Sometimes I don't understand why you do the things you do, or why you can't answer any of my questions. Maybe it's because I've never depended on anyone like I depend on you, Cloden. But I can't help myself. I can't help but love you, Cloden." She kissed him and then said, "So you have to promise me that whenever you feel ready, come and tell me everything. I'll wait." Then she left quickly and left him. She said to herself, "I did it. I've never been more honest about my feelings in my whole life. I did the right thing. I hope Cloden understands how I feel." Suddenly, the old woman who had warned her before appeared. Ray looked at her. Ray thought to herself, "Cloden's nanny. This is the first time she's appeared in front of me since she tried to scare me and drive me away." She remembered her words, "Don't give up your body, especially your heart." Just as she was about to leave, Cloden's nanny, Dila, stopped her and said, "Lady Ray, you have ignored my warning." Ray was shocked. Then, in anger, she clenched her fists and said, "Do you want me to leave Cloden?" Dila replied, "Yes." Ray asked, "Why is that?" Dila smiled and said, "Don't you really know? Because you're the only one who has." Ray interrupted her, saying, "Just stop talking." Dila asked, "Are you afraid to hear the truth?" Ray replied, "Yes, I'm afraid, but I don't want to run away before I face the truth. I'll wait until Cloden tells me everything." Then Ray left. Dela looked at the ground in silence. Then she looked at Ray and thought to herself, "She still has a pure soul, for some reason. It hasn't been tainted yet. It can't be possible in this mansion. This mansion is for all the cursed souls. From time to time, guests will come to visit the mansion, but each of them left the mansion with a curse imposed on them by the master. That's why I warned her to run away before she becomes Cloden's next scapegoat. She must leave this mansion before anything foolish happens." She went to Cloden and said, "Master Cloden, she's the youngest of the children who arrived recently, isn't she? Have you done anything to her brother yet? I've told you many times not to do anything like that. You know that everything of yours is at stake every time you cast a curse." Then she gave him a newspaper and said, "This is news I got from my recent visit outside the mansion. It's all news about major events that have happened recently." Cloden took it, and while he was looking at it, she said, "What if I brought Lady Ray back?" Cloden looked at her and then smiled, calling her by her name, Dila. He put down the newspaper and said, "Be careful with your words. Some might think I kidnapped her." Dila replied, "You know exactly what I'm saying." Cloden said, "Stop evading and speak directly." Dila said, "I know you can't say you didn't mean for her to fall in love with you. Let her go. You have to do it yourself." Cloden said, "I never meant for that to happen. I didn't make her fall in love with me. I want her." Dela looked at him in astonishment, thinking to herself, Whenever he wants something for himself, he hides it in his secret place since childhood. We don't know what kind of destruction awaits him if he starts to crave someone. Sir, I am not cursed, as you know. When you were cursed, I was fortunate enough to escape to the city to avoid the wrath. That's why I'm the only one who can travel outside the mansion. I may not be a monster, but I'm not an ordinary human either. Because of your presence in the mansion, I don't die, but I'm not a ghost either. It's more like I'm moving inside this empty body, but I can disappear at any second if I decide to leave the mansion. Are you planning to turn Lady Ray into someone like me? Cloden fell silent and thought of Ray. Dila said, I don't want you two to go down the path of destruction. I sincerely hope that karma doesn't catch up with you. Then she left him and silently departed. When Philip arrived, Cloden instructed him, do not allow Dila to enter this mansion from now on. Philip, taken aback, replied, excuse me, but Dila won't last long outside the mansion. Cloden glared at him and said, then so be it. Philip, his voice laced with tension, asked, are you planning to let her die? Cloden responded, she made an inappropriate comment about Ray. He gazed out the window and then added, make sure she never returns. The scene shifts to Ray, who is walking down the corridor, lost in thought and sorrow. She recalls Dila's words, you ignored my warning. Don't expect Master Cloden to change, do you? Some things will never change, no matter how hard you try. And you'll regret this. Hayes said to Ray, look at me closely. Don't I remind you of someone? Ray looked at him and said, oh, wait a minute, are you? Hayes beamed, thinking she had finally recognized him, and said, yes, you do know me, don't you? To himself, he thought, can you imagine how frustrating that was? Ray surprised him by saying, didn't you used to work at Lisbon Manor? Hayes exclaimed, what? The maid Mary arrived and said, you seem bored, John. She threatened him, saying, I can tell Master Cloden to give you some tasks. As Hayes left, Mary asked, are you all right, Lady Ray? Did John say anything strange? Ray replied, it's fine. He didn't say much. Suddenly, Ray closed her eyes and thought to herself, my head only hurts when I think about all these things with Cloden, but why do I keep engaging in these strange interactions? Then she said to the maid, Lady Mary, while also thinking to herself, I wish I could stop thinking. Ray asked the maid, can I have a drink? The maid complied and gave Ray a bottle of wine. Ray thought to herself, Lady Mary actually gave me something strong, the drink with the lowest alcohol content. Feeling sheepish, Ray said, I feel relaxed. Suddenly, Cloden appeared and started playing with Ray's hair while gazing at her. Ray noticed his presence and exclaimed with joy, Cloden, when did you get here? Cloden replied, just now, and took hold of her, saying, come here, Ray. Ray embraced Cloden and said, Cloden responded, yes? Ray smiled and said, you have the sweetest lips, Cloden. It was the first thing I noticed about you. She placed her hands on his lips, and Cloden looked at her. Ray leaned in and kissed him, saying, stay the night, please. Cloden placed his hands on her lower back, and Ray said, please. Cloden asked, what are you trying to do to me, huh? And kissed her on the cheek. Ray was in a state of bliss, and here Cloden placed her on the bed, saying to her, Ray, as you already know, I never had a mother. There's something I've always wanted to experience. Ray innocently asked, what is it? Cloden smiled and said, can you do it for me? Ray replied, tell me what it is and I'll do it. Cloden asked, really? And here Cloden took off his clothes and Ray said, Cloden, when I was little, there was a child who would breastfeed from his mother in order to fall asleep. When Ray finally understood, she said, wait, Cloden. But he continued, saying, thank you for your great willingness, Ray. Ray looked at him shyly and said, wait, Cloden. But he kept going, and Ray said, Cloden, wait, stop. Nothing is coming out.